Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the latest Service Department News webinar. Today, we are going to be discussing ESG and how to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. My name is George Sell. I'm editor of Service Department News, and we are a multimedia platform for the Service Department, Aparthotel, and extended stay sectors. Now, these Service Department News webinars have got a couple of sponsors, and we are just going to find out a bit more about them before we kick off. And the first is IMS. So thank you to IMS. If you'd like to find out more about them, you can get in touch with the contact details that you will see posted in the chat. And our second sponsor today is Corporate Housing Factory.
We are Corporate Housing Factory, your go-to company for booking temporary and extended stays in the Netherlands. Let me tell you what we do. We have about 200 service departments in the Netherlands in all major cities. Big, small, luxurious, minimalistic, modern and cosy. Our apartments are always fully furnished, weekly cleaned, provided with super speed internet, and we can offer an airport pick-up or drop-off too. Now, tell us what type of apartment you're looking for.
So thanks to Corporate Housing Factory, and again, you can see their contact details in the chat. So today's webinar is going to take an hour. We are going to try and make it as interactive as possible. So we'd like to encourage you to submit some questions using either the Q&A or the chat function in Zoom. Everybody who's registered for the session will be sent the link to a recording shortly afterwards. And when we get to the end of the session, because there's going to be quite a lot of information posted in the chat, we're going to do the countdown clock again for a couple of minutes, just so you can make some notes of all the information that's in there. So I just want to show a few slides of screen grabs stories we've run on our various websites, just to give a flavour of some of the topics that we are likely to talk about over the next hour. Net zero targets are going to be a big one. Obviously, some of the major property and hospitality brands have set themselves some quite ambitious targets. Heinz 2040 target actually includes no offsetting. So that's a really, really ambitious one. And everywhere you look in the sector, you're seeing companies focusing on sustainability and ESG, including some of the players that we've got with us today. So we've got James from Beyond, who's one of the stories there. Mansley is another operator increasing its sustainability efforts. And the general focus on ESG is predicted to result in a lot more investment into real estate assets. One of the most interesting stories recently was this NREP, internal carbon tax. They're a very progressive company, and I think this might be a bit of a game changer and a new sort of benchmark for how the big companies approach zero carbon. And we're also going to touch on sustainability ratings, accreditations, and that kind of thing, because that's another complicated subject. So we've got three fantastic panelists with us today. I'm going to ask them all to introduce themselves in turn. And we'll start with JoAnna, who we are extremely grateful to, because not only is it 6 o'clock in the morning where she is, it's also the Thanksgiving holiday. So she really has gone above and beyond the call of duty. So thanks, JoAnna, and welcome to the session. Hello, JoAnna.
6 o'clock in the morning. I need my chai to get going here. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here and delighted to be a part of the conversation today. I'm JoAnna Abrams. I'm the CEO of Mindclick. Mindclick is a big data and analytics company focused on evaluating the environmental and social impact of the products that are produced by suppliers of furniture, fixture, and equipment, and architectural building products that go into spaces throughout the built environment. Our strong suit is in the hospitality industry, and we got our start working with Marriott International to help them green the global supply chain. The ratings and the data and analytics that we provide do two things. They help purchasing decision makers and designers make more informed specification decisions in support of sustainability, but they also help the manufacturers themselves understand ways that they can improve the environmental and social impact of the products they provide.
Excellent. Thank you, JoAnna. James, welcome to you.
Hi there, George. Thank you. Yes, I suppose my background is I started up something called Aparthotels in Switzerland about 7 or 8 years ago. Now, one of our big pillars of the brand there was sustainability. I sort of started doing that because I thought everyone would be doing it, if I'm totally honest, and we had to keep up with everyone, and then watched flabbergasted as virtually no one did it, or certainly didn't do it in a meaningful way. I've now started up something called Beyond Aparthotels and Service Departments. We are now rolling out across the UK, and we have a site in the UK, in London, York, and Harrogate so far. And it's really something we're building from the bottom up. Every decision we take is around the impact that we have. And I'm very aware that companies that are doing it from the top down, it is a more difficult process than we're going through. But we want to be one of the leading brands across all of the hospitality sectors to really showcase what can be done.
Excellent. Thanks, James. We seem to have lost visual contact with you, James. I don't know if you can get your camera back on. There you are.
There I am. Good. Sorry about it. Best not to see me anyway.
And finally, Paul, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon and happy Thanksgiving, JoAnna and everybody in the States. My name is Paul MacSherry. I'm an international project manager for Kaldewei. Kaldewei is a German manufacturer that's been producing luxury bathroom products for over 100 years we have 3 product lines and 2 ingredients. The 3 product lines are wash basins, bathtubs, and shower surfaces. And the 2 ingredients are steel, iron ore, and enamel. We fuse the enamel onto the steel, and it therefore carries 100% circularity without degradation and a 30-year warranty. Therefore, we are very much into our sustainability. We have a lot of other activities that we commit ourselves to, but importantly, we have independent verification to leader status, and that is by Mindclick, which we've been a leader status for a number of years with Mindclick. So our view is sustainability, and it is really more about circularity, but we'll come on to that later. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. You're also the first person to join one of these webinars from the bathroom, so always innovating. Well done.
Not quite literally, people.
Okay, so let's kick off. We saw from the slides I showed at the start there that the investment community and the big real estate companies are behind a lot of the ESG momentum that's coming into the service department and the extended stay space. James, could you kick off by telling us now what investors expect and what they're looking for in operations and buildings compared with perhaps a couple of years ago, and how quickly the agenda's moved on?
Yeah, I can try. I mean, it's always interesting. I think there's definitely huge capital flows in this direction, and I suppose you always want to sort of, go with where the capital is going. People are becoming more sophisticated as they gain knowledge about what is possible and the options that are available. I think a lot of it has been focused on operations and what you can do at an operational level and some easy wins. I think that now is pivoting more towards embedded carbon or construction carbon. and what can be done there. So I think it's a two-way thing. It's really how you build the building, what you build the building out of, and very importantly, the operational aspect is hugely influenced by how you build the building. The insulation, I always say insulation. That's the most important thing you can do. Then you have a building management system that then can monitor, measure, manage the energy usage and so forth. And then it's really up to the operator. I think there has been a huge focus on energy. There's also the aspect of waste and chemical usage as well. And I think going forwards, there's a lot of noise, about this. Everyone's talking about it. I know, George, we have many conversations about it, and you talk to a lot of people. I think what's going to happen in the future is people are going to have to demonstrate what they're actually doing. What actions are they actually taking, and what is the impact of those actions? And I think that people who do that in a meaningful way will then be recognized, and also the brand value will exponentially rise, because I think going forwards, a lot of corporates, and they're not massively doing, but they're starting to put their money where their mouth is and look for these kind of solutions. The problem in the hospitality sector is there are very few genuine solutions. But if they are there, I think a lot of corporates will say, we can't stay anywhere else. And that's when it becomes really, really interesting. Final point is the big driver will be when it is recognized in exit yields, when corporates say, we will pay more for that because it's a future-proof building and we're not going to have them spend the money later down the line. And I think that will then drive a lot of future investment.
Yeah. And James, are we at the stage yet where the operator selection process is influenced by the operator's environmental credentials? Do you think you're in a good position because you've been building that into your business from the start, and other people are coming to the party later?
I mean, George, for me, the switch has gone off in my head, and I can't understand people who don't do it, because there's only going to be one direction of travel from now on. This is only going to get more and more important every year. I think for the people who get it, then we're a very good option. We're not a big company. We don't have loads of money in the bank, so we haven't got the greatest covenant strength in the world. And 90% of people, that's what they want. They want a safe option. We only started up last year. However, I would argue that we are the safer option, because where is our brand going to be in the future compared to the rather stagnated, tired brands that may have 100 hotels, but where are they going to be in 5 or 10 years from now, because they're not going to be able to change and adapt like we can. I often say it's like the internet in 96, 97. It wasn't IBM and Microsoft who did really well. It was the small upstarts who grew very, very quickly and created genuine experiences. So I think for the right owner operator who gets the fact that we can help with the planning, and certainly in York, our concept was looked on very favorably. In Harrogate, it's been looked on very favorably by local councils and planning departments. I think we can help in that aspect. And then I think also when investors say, well, right now, that you can get some small marginal gains on borrowing from banks, or even like Coutts are now starting to say that they'll waive the arrangement fee. But is that going to be more or less in the future? Well, there's going to be more of that in the future. And is a yield expectations or values, exit values going to go down more for this kind of product in the future? Is it more or less likely? Well, it's more likely. And are people going to pay more for genuine brands that do this in the future? Well, yes, it's more likely that that's going to happen. So no investor should be investing on where things are now, but on where it's going to be in the future. And I think therefore we have a very strong position to offer to operators and developers and investors going forward.
JoAnna, what's your take on that from a US perspective? I mean, obviously you've got some of the biggest investment companies such as Blackstone and so on investing heavily in extended stay hotels, for example, and they've got quite strict ESG criteria. How do you think that's going to filter down to the extended stay sector?
Oh, it's having a big impact already. First, kind of stepping back in terms of what's happening with the financial markets. All of the major banks globally have committed that by 2050, 100% of their financing is going to be for net zero emission initiatives. That's a really, really big goal. And if you know anything about financial folks, they're all about the data. So what we're seeing happen on projects, and this just occurred in a Hyatt Regency project in San Francisco that we've been involved with, the asset owner in this case was Morgan Stanley. And they were in a kickoff call with our organization, and they brought 10 bankers to the call, including the global head of hospitality, as well as the heads of other asset classes. They're very eager to figure out what's the quantitative story that is associated with these projects, whether it's ground up construction or whether it's renovation. We've also heard folks say that they're going to expect the brands to be more proactive about the decisions they're making for their prototypical brand standards, and that's going to go into their choice of which flags to choose as part of their investment portfolio. So, and then the third example I would share is that we know folks like Cerberus who are now pushing their operators to participate in entities like GRES, the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark, that again is a quantitative evaluation of the initiatives of these operators, and it looks at everything. It's looking at what's happening from an operational standpoint. It's looking at what the decisions are being made in terms of design and construction, social responsibility, et cetera. And those investments, et cetera, are getting a rating, which then ties into the valuation. So we're seeing it move much faster, frankly, than anything I've seen in my career. And I started my career in finance and accounting. So we expect that this will, as the big banks show the examples of what they're seeking, we expect more and more folks to come on board as well. And it is creating a sea change in decision-making criteria as to how buildings are, or how hotels are built, furnished, and operated.
Thanks, JoAnna. I want to stick with you for a minute, and before we move on to talk about operations, I want to talk about the actual physical asset. And as you alluded to in your introduction, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of products that go into an apartment or a hotel room, and for each one of those, there are a similar number of options of companies and suppliers to choose from. How can developers and owners and indeed operators, if they're included in this decision-making process, how can they ensure that such an enormous and complicated supply chain complies with the ESG criteria?
Yeah, it's the biggest challenge that's out there, quite frankly, George. And you know, the driver of this is that 80% of an organization's carbon footprint is in its supply chain. So for those who are leading in the space that have focused on reducing their scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, the operational emissions, they're now needing to turn to what's happening in their supply chain. Frankly, it's all about data, and the data is there in the supply chain. You've got folks like Kaldewei, who for 100 years, right, is built into how they do business. There are many organizations that there are great practices that are already underway, and data to show that. It's just not been a data set that's been focused on previously. So what it takes is companies who have the capabilities of pulling together those particular data sets that reflect what falls under the umbrella of environmental and social responsibility. And there's a number of factors that go into that contribute to a carbon footprint, including, you know, what it takes to extract the materials from our earth, what it takes to package them, to manufacture them, obviously circularity being a big one as well. And when you can apply some data and analytics to that in a consistent measurement framework, then you do have the ability to have comparative analysis occur. So it is something that, you know, we specialize in an organization. And what has happened historically, George, and I know that, Paul, you could speak to this, is there's a plethora of eco-labels and certifications out there. And that's certainly a starting point. But the challenge for folks is, what does each one mean? And ultimately, how do you get to the answer and the data behind it to support the kind of reporting that's needed? So that's the journey that many organizations are on. It starts with identifying what are the key performance indicators that you're looking from your supply chain, and making that very clear to folks and engaging them in that sharing of data and information.
Thanks, JoAnna. Paul, Kaldewei is obviously further down the road with this journey than a lot of other suppliers, but how are you communicating to your clients the advantages that come from specifying an ESG compliant product like yours? And is it becoming an easier sell in that it's an essential now? It's not just a nice thing to have, but it's a have to have now.
I would answer that by saying, I wish. It's different places, different parts of the world. I was in Dubai 2 weeks ago. That's a very different place to, say, in parts of Europe and some of the dynamism in America, for example. For us, I would also step it back a little bit. I've worked for 20 odd years in hotel development, resorts and branded real estate. So I understand how the market's moving. It's started to move fast. But if you use the sort of adoption life cycle, many parts of the world are still at the innovation stage. They're not even close to early adopter, not even close. And whether they need to, want to, or care to is a whole different story. For us, we have more approvals, more accreditations, European EPDs. We have all sorts of verification that say and we tell our clients what we do with it, what goes into the products, and how they can be recycled and reused and all those sorts of things. We're getting there. It's slow, but there's always a business case to say, well, it could be cheaper if we use a certain type of product, which is 0.5%, 50% plastic, but cannot be recycled, for example. That's one thing. Even when I say, if you can't recycle it and if you burn it, it emits cyanide, is that a concern? And quite often the answer is no. So we are not as far as we think we are, would be my estimation. We have to continue to share information. But then you listen to people like Lamington Group, who've been amazing. They're a client of ours. And they came out last week at a conference at Hicks last week in London. And they're talking about the need to look at what goes into the process of manufacturing, not the finished product, because the finished product can be described in many different ways. And they're saying things like, which was music to our ears, sometimes buying locally is not the best solution, depending on the product you're looking at. And of course, for many products, you should be buying locally. But look at the embodied carbon and then look at your scope 3 emissions moving on from that, which is very important. IHG then also said yesterday at another event that they're looking actively at adaptive reuse. So this is now we're getting change. Now we're getting people to say, right, what can we do with these hotels we're building? Remember, 80% of all hotels built today will be there in 2050.
Yeah.
And I would, and then just to finalize the sort of the business case, Sustainability Hospitality Alliance came out recently and said that hotels need to reduce their carbon reduction by 2030 by 66% per room. That rises to 90% per room reduction in carbon emissions by 2050. So yes, we're in a great position, but I feel there's a way to go yet.
The adaptive reuse thing is really interesting. We did a webinar last week about the pros and cons of new build versus conversions. And obviously there are a lot of things to consider. But one thing we're definitely seeing here in the UK is that planning authorities are very much on the side of reuse wherever possible. It's not always practical and it's not always the best idea, but they will usually opt for that. And the cost of new build at the moment has gone up so much that it's often economically unviable. I can remember it wasn't that long ago, it used to be per square meter, it used to be generally cheaper to do a new build than a conversion, but in a lot of cases that is not the case anymore. But with this embodied carbon issue, obviously that's the main reason for presuming to go for a conversion. But when you're looking at trying to set net zero carbon targets, is it possible to have an operationally net zero carbon converted building? Is it possible? I know it's a tricky one to throw in there. James, do you want to give us your thoughts on that? Because I know you're looking at conversions and new builds.
Thank you, George. Yes, look, thank you for that. We prefer to do conversions where possible, but like you said, not all buildings lend themselves to it. Not all buildings are very efficient to do it on. If the windows aren't, correctly spaced and so forth, then you have to create either very small or very large rooms and so forth. like I was talking about, the sort of insulation aspect is absolutely crucial. If you can take an old office building that's doesn't have too big a foot plates, because that can be a problem. If it's long and thin, then you can create hotel rooms front and back. Then that works, really well. Whether it can be a truly net zero carbon, building is another matter. To do that, you really need to only offset the final 10%. And I don't think we're yet at that stage. I think using materials like cross-laminated timber is going to help enormously over steel and concrete. But again, the insurance industry hasn't caught up with the construction industry. We would love to do that, but when we're building 100 Aparthotel rooms with 100 kitchens in there, there are potentially some issues. So I'm not going to pretend to be a construction expert. I'm on the operational piece, and our piece is about making sure the building is built in the right way. We have the right tools to reduce the amount of energy being used, the amount of water being used, and so forth. And then we employ techniques in our operational practices that reduce everything. So not just energy, but like I mentioned before, waste and chemical usage. Just one example of that is we use ozone to clean our sheets and towels. It's chemical free. It's washed at 30 degrees, which has a massive impact when compared to washing it at 60 degrees in terms of the amount of energy that's used. It's picked up in electrical vehicles or cargo bikes. So it's taking some of those kind of steps. Like JoAnna was saying, it's across the supply chain. It's not just what we do on site, it's the suppliers that we then choose to use. And again, like I've said before, people just need to step out slightly outside their comfort zone. There is so much innovation out there. There's so many suppliers that are doing interesting things in low impact ways. Just step and go onto Google and type in, I'm looking for this solution, and you'll find lots of it, rather than just doing what most hoteliers do, is just carry on regurgitating the same thing. Oh, we've used those guys for 10 years, so we'll carry on using them. Their options are out there. People just don't even have to look that hard. they just have to look for it in the first place.
Yeah. James, when you said the insurance industry is lagging behind with regards to cross-laminated timber, is that they're worried about fire risk?
Correct. The big issue is, and again, without being the world expert, is they think wood, fire. It's complete rubbish in terms of, because it's been compacted in a very good way. It's very, very robust, and although the outside would burn, it's very, very strong. Steel, if it warms up, to a certain temperature, Paul will know more about this, will obviously melt as well. So it's really a perception rather than a factual thing. And we would love going forwards, much like Zeal Hotels are doing. I think they're doing a great job. I think they have got around that, and like I said, people are starting to get around it, but it's going to take some time for the insurance industry to be able to say, yes, we'll insure that 10-story block. So as soon as you're doing something like that over a certain height with cross-laminated timber, they're going to go, not happening. And then the only solution is to fall back on the old school, habits of concrete and steel, which we'd rather avoid. So we're looking at all options that are available, if available, and then we'll look to take those. But also looking, and what we can do is the fit out. So we're concentrating on working with interior practice on creating the fit out of the room that is circular, low in toxicity, and we identify exactly how much carbon is produced from that supply chain of installing that into our rooms.
Yeah, okay.
I think if I may there, George, this has been successful in the States already, using cross-laminated timber to build high-rise structures. We're also involved we're a chosen supplier to a project in Hamburg, which is based on cradle-to-cradle basics, which will feature cross-laminated timber as well. So it is coming, and James is absolutely right. I think, however, just as a note, if you're melting steel, you'll melt pretty much everything else in the building. So, I'm not defending steel, of course not, but steel is possibly the most recycled product on the planet, and it needs to get better, of course. But these innovative innovations are very much sought after. And James is right, just, have a look. But one thing I would say, if I may, is that there's a lot of reasons why sustainability gives you return on investment. It's really quite clear. And, to James's point earlier, and JoAnna deals with this daily, is that it makes sense to build sustainably because you will therefore protect your asset. You therefore don't have a brown asset or a stranded asset. You don't have to worry about your carbon risk trajectory. What am I going to have to spend to get this project back on track? If I'm refurbing, what are the risks? This is all the sort of data, back to what JoAnna was talking about, is readily becoming available. So, embrace it. You can charge, at the moment, there are people charging slightly higher rates successfully. They're keeping the customer happy. And you can save those, and you're meeting your carbon targets. And ultimately, your asset, as James said at the very start, will be protected. So when CapEx and when exit values get looked at, there are no hidden horrors within your bathrooms or anywhere else in the hotel. So therefore, it does make sense. It's not easy because there's far too many options and claims on various different products or X, Y, and Z, but it does make sense. And sustainability with luxury, we call it luxtainability. It can be profitable, dare I say it. It does help the balance sheet.
So who do you need to convince of that, Paul? Is it the investor behind the building, or is it the QS, or is it, obviously it is a premium product. It is more expensive than other options. How do you sort of quantify the financial benefit of this circular product, and who is it that you actually need to convince to make sure it gets installed in a project?
I can see JoAnna smiling because this is a conversation we have regularly. Ultimately, it's the money. Yes, there is no planet B here. We are in a very sticky situation with the planet. But if you put that to one side, if the money, the institutional investor, right through to the investor, right through to developer, then the advisory, design, architecture, right through to brand, operations, asset management, and therefore exit, that's the supply chain we're looking through, the services chain that has to be influenced. And I think if we can take a very cold look at sustainability and say, does it pay? That's where we get the interest for people to change their mindsets. I'll give you a small example. It's not a small example, it's a terrifying example. We have a client, not in Europe, very well-known hotel group. The developer is insisting on putting in a certain number of what I would call plastic bathtubs, okay? I'm not going to name it for good reasons. But that developer will probably save today about $100,000 on several hundred rooms. It will cost that developer somewhere in the region of over 300,000 euros or dollars over the next 10 years for various different repair rooms, etc. That's not before the CapEx revision comes in. That's not before, if they want to exit it, that they'll suddenly see a significant drop in their values. The hotel brand can't actually do too much, but the developer is clearly not listening. And just a word to your product on how, we are in the luxury sector, but our products actually are in pretty much most Premier Inns, Motel 1s, 25 Hours Bikini, as well as Raffles and Four Seasons, Ritz-Carlton, and even on super yachts. So whilst we have a great positioning in sort of the luxury sector, there's very much a strong presence in lifestyle, because it's back to what from my hotelier days is you want to put something in your hotel room that doesn't alert the carbon trajectory alarm, and that secondly, you don't want to have to think about it. You let it do its job. You keep the room open, you keep it operational, you keep that yield happening. So, those are the challenges that I've just outlined my job. I work from top to bottom.
Probably the most extended plug for their company anyone's ever done one of these webinars.
Touche.
So let me hop in here, which is let's take a step back from the ROI perspective, right? You've got two ways of looking at this: heads and beds, and then what's the value of that asset, right? So from a heads and beds standpoint, starting there, we know that the demand from the corporate travel buyer for properties to be able to quantitatively demonstrate what they're doing that supports their own Scope 3 reduction initiatives. By their own, I mean, what's interesting in the research out there is that all of these major corporate travel buyers are on the hook for reducing their own carbon footprint. And that, of course, includes Scope 3, because remember, 80% of their carbon footprint is in the supply chain. Do you know the number one data set that's reported on with respect to Scope 3? It's travel. Okay. So if you're in the hotel business and you're not putting initiatives in place to be able to demonstrate with third-party verification. Because remember, these companies are going to have to report in a quantitative way that can be audited by accountants, because this is tied into the financial sector. So as a hotelier, you've got to be able to stand behind any claim that you're making about what your hotel offers from the standpoint of sustainability. That is going to get you more heads and beds from the corporate travel buyer, right? And if you're competing with the apartment down the street or the Aparthotel down the road, right? What's going to make yours stand out as a destination and a choice factor for those corporate travel buyers? We're actually working on a project now where the renovation plan is tied directly to the ability to promote the story to the businesses in the area, which represent a lot of technology businesses, and a rapid time frame to sell that property and to see what we're able to do to increase asset value as a result of being able to get more heads and beds from a corporate travel buyer. Then we know from booking.com that over 70% of global travelers are looking to travel more sustainably. Again, they're looking for stories that they can trust in terms of the choices that they're making. So on the demand side, it's more of a question of if you're not making changes, if you're not making progress from a sustainability story, you're actually leaving opportunity on the table and your competitor is going to win out. Does that yield a price premium? It's going to depend, right? But it's really more about making sure you're not losing share. And then on the asset valuation standpoint, I mean, Paul brings up a good point. When you are putting in product that is not going to perform at the level that these properties need, and there's increased maintenance costs involved, and there's increased costs of when you think about acquiring an asset and you're going to upgrade the interiors, right? And you've got to deal with the problem of how do you dispose of those interiors? And there isn't a circularity story involved. And that includes your case goods. It includes your, the fabrics out there. It includes the lighting. It includes all those things, right? If that's all going into the landfill, we're going to start to see increased costs to that owner of having to dispose of those products. So if you're buying from the get-go products that have manufacturers who will take back that product or have built-in circularity or even adaptive reuse when it comes to furniture, you're going to position yourself in a better way when that asset gets sold.
Yeah. And JoAnna, you mentioned data earlier. You said obviously the finance guys are really keen to see data. The travel buyers want to see evidence from operators and hotel companies what they're doing. But it's quite a complicated scenario out there in terms of how to measure your performance, which accreditation schemes are the most relevant ones for you. How should a hotelier who's at the start of this journey plot their way to being able to show the relevant people that they're doing what's needed in terms of financiers and in terms of the end users, particularly the corporate travel buyers?
Yeah, it's a good question. What I can share with you is what one of our clients, Highgate Hotels, has done with us. When they started on the journey, they went out to individual suppliers to say, what can you tell us about your sustainability story of your products? And it became overwhelming very quickly. And a number of those suppliers that they work with are in our program. And they said, look, you need to work with Mindclick because Mindclick's going to pull all this together for you. And fast forward to what we're doing today is on every project, we're working with the design and construction teams from the get-go to first define what is it that are the goals of the project. And we actually use, and it's meant to be an internal tool, but a rating system where we're aggregating the individual ratings of the products that they're considering to come up with what's that overall performance look like for that project. What that does is it aligns all of the designers, architects, the procurement teams around a common goal. And so we make it easy for folks by saying, look for those products that are at least achiever or leader rating. We have a 200-point scale. That scale was built through a stakeholder engagement process that included the U.S. Green Building Council, Marriott, vendors, architects, designers, sustainability, consulting firms, and the like. So it follows globally accepted standards, which the certifications out there are a way to say, here's what a company's doing against those globally accepted standards. But because there's so many, and there's different aspects of a product life cycle that are certified, it's overwhelming for folks to make sense of it. So think of us as sitting on top of it and making sense through our ratings program. So as a result, the designers can put forth a design concept and a specification that already is predisposed to support what the end goals are in terms of carbon reduction, circularity, healthy materials, fair labor practices and human rights, or diversity, equity, inclusion, reduced packaging, things, all of those things which are impacting a better sustainability story. And so as the teams are making decisions, they're able to have right at the table, not only are they looking at the design aesthetic, the quality of the product, the lead times, price, but they're also able to look at the environmental and social impact right from the get-go. And that just carries through the entire project, even when you get into the value engineering stage. So as decisions are being made to say, well, we're going to try to save some money here, or perhaps there's a supply chain issue, we can't get the product in time. If we choose this other vendor or product, what will that do to the overall performance story? Then at the end of that initiative, once all the decisions are made, we're then packaging that for use in ESG reporting, as well as being able to pull from that for the consumer, the guest-facing story, bringing to life not just what was potentially a rating or a score, but what's the story behind it? And that's what really engages people, right? What do you mean by products are made of recycled materials? What's the story behind it? And that's what folks really get excited about. So our approach is making sense of the noise. And that's, you know, whether a company chooses to take that on their own or use someone like us, that's really this support that's going to be needed because it's a big data challenge.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, JoAnna. James, did what JoAnna said about corporate travel buyers and the obligations that are on them now when choosing accommodation, does that chime with your experience? Are you seeing them take much more of an interest in the sustainability performance of your buildings and your operations?
They're starting to. Again, unfortunately, lots of talk, not so much action. There has been one of the major, if not the major corporate booker in the UK rang us up the other day and said, James, we have done some quite big pitches to some of the biggest companies in the world, tech companies, and we talk about the big guys, the guys who've got hundreds or thousands of service departments and so forth, and we tag you in at the end, you know, just to say, by the way, we've got a sustainable operator. And in two cases with these companies, they say, great about the other ones, can we go and see beyond? We got called up by Al Gore's company, Generation Capital, the other day, saying, hi, we are obviously sustainable, we're looking for sustainable solutions, can we come and see you? So I think it's slowly starting. I think the new age tech companies are certainly actually leading the way. I think it was interesting what JoAnna said about travel being the major scope 3 emission. Is actually for a company like PwC, it is their major emission, not just scope 3. It's 75% of their emissions. So again, going forwards, there's going to be a huge opportunity to be able to go to PwC if you've got a site close to them and say, look, we understand that the air flight is the majority of it, but we can help with the accommodation aspect, as well. So I think, look, they're starting to, I think it started as a trickle. It's been a trickle for 20 years. It's become a stream. It is going to become a wave or a tidal wave over the next, few years. So you can either sort of get on board or get left behind, as far as I'm concerned. Just very quickly coming to what JoAnna's doing with materials and construction and so forth. I really like to try and simplify things as much as possible. I have to make sure it works for me. And the one thing I say to people for operations is, you get your utility bill, you know how much kilowatt hours of energy you're using. That's the data point. Compare it to a month ago, 6 months ago, a year ago or so, and then use sustainable renewable energy. The amount of time people say, what do I do? How do I take the first step? Pick up the phone and 5 minutes later, you're buying from a renewable energy source. If everyone in the hotel industry did that with 100 rooms and 100 hotels, it would have a huge amount of impact in terms of driving, more renewable energy to be put into the grid. So although it is a complex subject, it can be really broken down to some really big wins. And then I think there's lots of other little wins. And I think it is I get frustrated that it's been made so complex. There's so much accreditation. We're not into accreditation. We're into doing. And if that meets some standard, tick some box, then great. Otherwise, we really couldn't give a damn. We'll just do whatever we think is the best solution. And if someone else comes up with a better one, we'll change to that. And if there's a good story and so forth behind it, then we'll do that. And I think for me, people have to worry a little less about ticking boxes and data points and just get on and do it.
Okay, James. I want to move on to talk about offsetting in a minute, but Paul, did you want to come in on that last point?
Yeah, just really quickly, two things I noticed today. British Airways have now announced that you can offset your flights directly on their platform. So that was nice to see. And also, but to James's point, sometimes it can be really simple. IHG said yesterday publicly that they, in 2019, they started to review all of their operations to see if they could be more sustainable. And without any inside intervention, they've reduced their carbon footprint by 19%. That's just working internally. And as James said earlier, insulation plays it's simple, but it plays a huge part in all of that.
Okay. Paul, let's stick with you for a minute and talk about offsetting. So attitudes to offsetting are changing and evolving, and people's ideas of what are the best way to offset are also evolving quite fast. What do you do at Kaldewei? I would imagine the production of steel is a fairly carbon intense procedure, isn't it, involving high temperatures? So what do you do to offset?
We have our kilns, which need to operate at over 800 degrees Fahrenheit, etc. For us, we do offset a little bit. We have this year planted over 45,000 trees in Germany alone itself. However, and this is really important, we don't rely on offsetting. We are committed. So next year we are putting in 46,000 square meters of solar paneling to drive clean energy. So I think offsetting before, I do believe it's great if people are trying, that's really good, and long may you continue, because we haven't figured this puzzle out just yet, for sure. So for me, I think I welcome to see it, but the line becomes, where do you draw the line becoming we are sustainable because we offset and nothing else? Therein lies the problem. We had one of those recently where an owner said, yeah, I'm buying from a net zero production factory. Really? But it's all offset. So, and I worry how, if you're offsetting too much today or relying only on offsetting, how does that affect your exit values going down the line in 10 years, 5 years? Because I do believe in 10 years' time, these conversations, we'll look back at these conversations and think, wow, because this will be part of what we're doing, what James is doing, what JoAnna is doing. They're ahead of the curve.
Yeah. I mean, offsetting can't be an excuse just for carrying on doing what you've been doing in previous.
I'd like to jump in here and just address both what James and Paul were saying. James, I couldn't agree with you more. There is so much noise out there, and having come from a manufacturing background myself in consumer products, I ran brands for the Nestle's and the PepsiCos of the world. It's that people don't understand supply chain, and they believe that it's so incredibly complex. But what you said is spot on. It starts with the basics, right? How much energy are you using to produce a product? What can be done to reduce that energy as a starting point? Paul just gave us a perfect example, right? What's the energy mix that's coming from the utility? What can you do in your own manufacturing operations? Where are your manufacturing operations even, right? If you start to take apart everything that's involved in a product life cycle, there's so many low-hanging fruit opportunities. I love to share this example because everyone can get it. On average, every product uses 30% more packaging than it needs. If we did nothing more than just fix that problem, imagine how much we're able to reduce our carbon, because you don't need to produce as much packaging. You can get more product on a carrier. There's less handling of that packaging when it gets to its destination. And then the next journey of that packaging, which we hope goes into the recycling stream, but we know doesn't as much as we'd like. That's energy. It ends up in the landfills. It converts into methane gases. I mean, you can see it all the way through, right? So there are some of those change the light bulb kind of moments that exist. that is where everyone can get started, and you just cut to the chase on just being smarter and more efficient. And really, that's, if you get to the bottom of it, a lot of what sustainability is about is efficiency. Why are we using so much stuff, right? Why do we need to have all this excess? And how do we get down to what's really needed to support what a great hotel experience is with the products that go into the spaces? So I just want to really underscore that, so that folks don't come away from this thinking, oh my God, this is so complicated. How can I even deal with this? And really, it just starts by asking the simple questions, right? Look at the product life cycle. What can you do throughout each stage that can be incremental changes? You add up a lot of incremental changes, and we're going to make a lot of progress.
Mm-hmm. And what's your feeling on offsetting, JoAnna, and what's the current thinking across the supply chain from a US perspective?
Well, I don't want to speak for the US, because you know, that's a big leap. I will tell you,
Day. Come on.
Especially on Thanksgiving Day, right? But I will tell you that in our assessment, we actually don't give points for using carbon offsets. We will acknowledge it and certainly share that information, but that's not points that we give. It's there's just a lot of lack of quality, if you will, and controls around what's going on in the world of offsetting. There's reuse of the same acreage for some of that offsetting. It's just not to the point where it's fully regulated such that there's trust behind what's happening there. Now, it is, we are starting to hear some rumblings of things happening that are going about fixing that. And I do think that there is a place at the table for it, but there's got to be some more clear rules and accounting, if you will, as to how much can you use to offset. And really, it should be, what are all the things that an organization can do in their own operations, to the point where there just isn't anything more. Like, you just can't possibly squeeze anything more out of what you're doing. And in that case, is there an opportunity? But I think the risk we run is applying way too much, to Paul's point of, oh, I'm just buying carbon offset credits, and therefore now I'm sustainable.
Yeah. And again, it comes down to the measuring piece as well, doesn't it? How do you
Absolutely.
actually quantify what that acreage of trees or whatever it's doing? It's a tricky one.
Yes.
Before we wrap up, I want to touch on the S of ESG and the kind of obligations that everyone in the whole supply chain, operators, suppliers, investors, and so on, have to their local communities and to their employees and beyond. Paul, what is Kaldewei's take on the social side of things?
Well, I'll give you, for instance, which, funnily enough, we don't get enough recognition, in my opinion, for, is that we've had a sort of a student scheme running, an apprenticeship running. And, you know, we take up to 30, 35 people a year. Now, I only joined Kaldewei last year, and I thought, this is a great new initiative. It's been running for 80 years. 80 years of training people to go out there and become good engineers in whatever they may be. And there's a lot we can do, and every company can do more to get that balance correct. And there's also a little bit of, we have to be mindful of how much can that company achieve within the actual setup that they have. But we certainly take it very seriously because our clients expect us as the manufacturing part to lead the way. And that's also an interesting point. I have noticed that, having worked hotel side, having worked development side, now working manufacturing side, I do notice that a lot of the industry looks towards the manufacturing guys to say, well, you start it and we'll follow. So just on the ESG point, yeah, it's very much on the table, but it has to make good business sense. And I believe the Kaldewei, you know, takes it extremely serious in terms of who we employ, how we employ, what we do outside the family. Are a very private family, but they do a lot of other things that don't necessarily need to be done, but they do. So yeah, I think we do a reasonably good job as far as I can tell.
James, what do you think a service department or an Aparthotel property can do to tick the S in ESG, you know, the way it interacts with its local community and so on?
I think one thing, often hotels can be quite closed off to the local community. They're very much for people from outside coming into that area. They're often welcome because they come and, people come and spend money and so forth. But I think the more you can bring people in to that space, then it becomes, part of the community and is very, very good. I mean, one thing we will be doing in our Aparthotels is having zero waste shops, because I think that enables that to come to the area, people to come into the space to get what they want. And also, if you've got a restaurant and bar in the building, if you don't use the stuff that's sold in the shop, it's going out of date, you can use it in the restaurant and bar. And I think it sends a very strong message about the kind of brand that we are. One thing that we do is we don't use any chemicals to clean our rooms. We use a water and salt based solution, and I mentioned ozone earlier. Maids are the forgotten employees of hotels. There's actually 690,000 people employed in the cleaning industry, not just in hotels in the UK. And there are 3,000 accidents involving chemicals by those people a year, every single year, splashing on the skin, going into their eyes and so forth. And also maids suffer from 40% more respiratory diseases than the general population because they spray chemicals all day. It goes in and over a period of time, it's not over a year or two, but over many years, it has a detrimental effect. So it also has an impact, on the local area and so forth. So we are, one of our big things is sustainable wellness and looking to reduce the amount of toxic chemicals we put into our buildings, into the environments that we spend, our guests spend time in, and our staff spend time in, and inviting people to come in from the local community to enjoy the spaces that we provide.
Yeah, thanks, James. We just had a question come in, which I'm going to ask JoAnna to answer before we wrap up. It's from David Wright, who is from Mansley, I believe, which is one of the operators who are really trying to get engaged with this subject, which is great. David says, there is some negativity towards accreditation. Does the panel not see value in accreditation programs as they can help show people the right path if they are struggling to find it themselves? What's your take on that, JoAnna?
I think that it's making sure that you're choosing an accreditation that has real integrity behind it and there's true feasibility in terms of making real progress. So to just give an interesting perspective, if we take certifications and eco-labels of products themselves that go into spaces, manufacturers, because of the cost that's involved, aren't usually going to get a eco-label or certification for every single product that they're offering through their product catalog. And when we built this whole program with Marriott, the goal was focusing on greening the global supply chain. Every product can and should be made in ways that are better, and it's a journey. And by evaluating everything and where do you fall from a good, better, best rating standpoint, it provides a viable and attainable solution that addresses the challenges of price, availability, quality, et cetera, right? Plus sustainability. So I would just say that it takes some thorough analysis of what those accreditation programs are to ensure that you're not going to so limit yourself, and you're going to recognize that it is a journey and continue to be making improvement as to the initiatives that you put in place. So yes, they certainly serve as a resource to help guide the practices that can be put in place. But again, just like anything else, pick carefully. Yeah,
great stuff. Thanks, JoAnna. And thanks to you all. That was a really interesting discussion. We've actually gone over our hour already. So I'll start wrapping up. Just going to show a few more slides before we finish, and then we'll leave the countdown clock open. But thanks for your participation and your input and your knowledge. It was great stuff.
Thanks, George.
Thank you, everybody.
So our next Service Department News webinar is on December the 15th, and that's when we'll be looking forward to next year and evaluating some of the trends that we think will be relevant in the industry in 2023 and beyond. If you'd like to sign up for that, then the link is in the chat. Just wanted to give a quick plug to our Recharge event, which is taking place in Lisbon in January. It's a great, intimate, interactive event that I think it's my favorite of the events we do. It's really great. It moves around different European cities every year. Again, more info there in the chat. If you'd like to work with us at IHM across any of our brands, do drop Katie a line. You can see her contact details there on the screen. and also in the chat. And finally, thanks to you all for watching. Thanks to Paul and to James, and especially to JoAnna for getting up at the crack of dawn on Thanksgiving Day, much appreciated. Thanks to you all for watching, and hopefully see you all again soon. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.